Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Tim Russell, VP Community Engagement and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for WTTW and WFMT, and welcome to today's Chicago Tonight Voices, a WTTW News Community Conversation. WTTW is committed to producing and presenting trusted, best-in-class content fueled by distinctly Chicago sensibility. We have served as Chicago's window to the world, and our purpose is to enrich lives, engage communities, and inspire exploration. Today is a special Voices conversation focused on WTTW News and Chicago Tonight special coverage, A Safer City. As part of our special coverage, we're taking a deep dive into neighborhood crime, violence, and public safety. Throughout the summer months, as residents, policymakers, and community groups work to address the growing issue. For dedicated coverage, watch Chicago Tonight on Mondays at 5:30 and 10 p.m. and find ongoing and extensive data and investigative reporting on the WTTW News website. WTTW's special of A Safer City is supported by the Su Ling Jin Charitable Foundation Initiative for Reducing Violence in Chicago. Before we get things going, I'd like to extend a special thanks to our lead supporter for Chicago Tonight Voices, Fifth Third Bank. The generous support of Fifth Third Bank, our sponsors, and WTTW members and viewers like you make it possible for WTTW to bring provocative ideas to life, to tackle the issues that matter, and to expand our perspectives on the world in which we live. There is only one reason that this is possible, and that reason is you. Thank you for your support. So now, please welcome our host, Brandis Friedman.
Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for that introduction. And hello and welcome everyone out there in the cyber world to Chicago Tonight Voices, a WTTW News Community Conversation. And thank you for spending your afternoon with us. As Tim said, I am Brandis Friedman. And as he mentioned, I will be discussing with our panelists public safety and violence that Chicagoans experience throughout the summer months and beyond. We'll also be discussing how residents, policymakers, community groups, how they're all working to address this deeply rooted issue. You all are in a listen-only mode right now, but that does not mean that you can't be part of the conversation. We actually want to hear from you, so please do chime in on the chat function with your questions and your comments. I'll do my best to get those to our guests. So let's start by introducing those guests. I want to start with Garien Gatewood, the city's first ever deputy mayor of community safety. Prior to this role, Garien served as director of the Illinois Justice Project. That's a nonprofit working on criminal justice reform. Linda Tortolero, president and CEO of Mujeres Latinas in Accion. Linda is responsible for carrying out Mujeres' strategic plan to address effectively the immediate needs facing Latinas and their families. And Glen Brooks, director of community policing for the Chicago Police Department. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And if you want to go ahead and unmute, feel free to do so. Director Brooks, it looks like you're coming on as well. We'll see you soon. If you can, I'd actually like to start with you and talking about community policing strategies. Obviously, you're the director of community policing, so it's something you know a little bit about. But it's the kind of thing I feel like we hear a lot about community policing. We're not always clear on what it is and what it looks like day to day. Walk us through that, if you would, Director.
Good morning. How are you doing? Thank you for inviting us. Quick question.
Director, I can't see you.
Yeah, my camera is on. Wait,
there you are.
Yeah, they have a new computer for me. So
just to trip you up.
I welcome the question. Let's talk about community policing. Community policing is really the police department working with the community to solve those entrenched problems, to solve those quality of life problems, and really to come to the table as a partner. We spend a lot of time in building those relationships so that we can all have a safer community. And I think in Chicago, it has this really special meaning because unlike other jurisdictions and places around the city, where police officers may or may not live in the city and may live in the burbs, away from the people that they serve. In the city of Chicago, we all live here. All of our kids go to school together. We all shop at the same grocery store. We all drive down the same streets. So when we talk about community policing, it really is looking out for our neighbors, our families, as we try to make a better city.
Thank you. How does your team sort of, establish the relationships that make a better city with residents?
Another great question. So a couple things. Number one, we have an entire apparatus of tools that we reach out, from the beat meetings to the DAC meetings, to the subcommittee meetings, to our work with young people, to our victim services, which will be out this afternoon in response to the tragedy in Lawndale. All those things really combine to reach all 77 neighborhoods, all 278 beats throughout the city. Every single corner, we have a group of people who really work to build that relationship to address those problems, and they can be addressed at multiple levels. They can be addressed at that block level and at that neighborhood level.
Garien Gatewood, I want to get you in here. You and I have talked about this before on Chicago Tonight, of course, but within hours of him taking office, Mayor Brandon Johnson created your position, which means you're now tasked with addressing efforts to address the long-term root causes of crime and violence in the city. You all changed the name of the position a little bit, though, from Deputy Mayor of Public Safety to Community Safety. Why that change? Why do you think that change was needed?
Yeah, we think that change is needed for a couple of reasons, right? We wanted to really look at how we take a comprehensive approach to safety, and understanding that historically, when we've looked at safety through a public safety lens, it has been, here are these safety agencies, that's what we'll work with. In my role here in the mayor's administration, we genuinely work across every agency in the city, because safety is just not limited to one or two agencies. And then really thinking about how we build out a comprehensive layered approach through government, but also how we partner with folks in community, folks in the business sector, folks in the philanthropic sector, how we all come together to build a real comprehensive plan for community safety. It has been, it's been interesting so far. It's been really good, really thinking about how we develop stronger partnerships and build on a lot of the positive work that's been happening. But we really wanted to make this a community-centered approach.
You've been in the position couple of months now. What do some of those layers and partnerships look like?
Yeah, so 2 months tomorrow. So we're rocking and rolling. So some of those layers and partnerships, Glen, Director Brooks talked a bit about some of them, right? When you think about how we want to touch every area in the city. So this also means how we work with street outreach organizations, how we work with different agencies who are providing resources and supports for youth, how we're providing resources and supports for victims and survivors of violence and crime, but also really thinking about how we lean in with some of our other partners across the way to think about where their resources can be layered into, right? So at the beginning of the summer, we did a lot of work with the Chicago Community Trust and the business community to help provide resources, create safe spaces and safe space activations for young folks in and around the city throughout the June gap. So we think, literally thinking about not just the normal response by sending law enforcement in, we're really thinking about what other levers can we pull, not only in government, but what other levers can we pull in partnership with community.
Linda Tortolero, you work with women primarily. Kind of tell us, if you would, about the kind of public safety concerns that you try to address in your work.
Sure. For us, gender-based violence is a public safety issue. We want it to be recognized as one of the root causes of the violence that afflicts many communities across Chicago. So for us, that recognition is really important. For us, it's both going to, what do we do when there is a domestic violence crisis or a sexual assault crisis, but also thinking about how we can have a more expansive approach involving community members in terms of dealing with these kind of crises. For instance, how do we think about calling in youth and parents and grandparents and teachers to talk about what is happening in their schools? How do we start talking about domestic violence, sexual violence? What are healthy relationships? I think that is really important as well. And prevention is key. And so when we think about our prevention strategies, we also need to think about really addressing generational trauma. I'm really glad to hear that generational trauma is being talked more in our communities in terms of how violence and racism and sexism and other oppressive systems can really, affect our communities and how they approach their daily lives, and what are those barriers that they face. And I think for us, that is something that is really pivotal.
Linda, I imagine there's also a measure of a sort of training as well with regards to recognizing and identifying gender-based violence when it happens and how to respond to it.
So for us, what's really important is that our teachers and parents are well educated on domestic violence and sexual violence. I think that I really envision Chicago Public Schools being a partner as a community center where we talk about these issues at every age, and making sure that parents and guardians and grandparents are invited in to talk about this, so that if there is a child or a youth being sexually assaulted or there's domestic violence in the home, that we find them the mental health supports as well as the counseling and therapy that they need from an advocate in gender-based violence. So for us, we really see the public schools as a real vehicle for this kind of change.
Thank you. So police data shows that Chicago recorded 301 murders in the first 6 months of 2023. Now, that is a 6% decrease from the first 6 months of 2022. Meanwhile, the number of people shot in Chicago dropped. The number of people shot, I don't want to blaze through that too quickly, more than 10% in the first 6 months of this year compared to the first 6 months of last year. But of course, crime remains higher in Chicago than when you compare it to other big cities, which means obviously all of you still have a lot of work to do. Garien, before we talk about some of the solutions, what do you think is behind this drop that we're currently seeing?
I think it is a mixture of really diligent work that folks have been doing over a long period of time. But also I think it is important, Brandis, you and I have had this conversation before, often when we talk about numbers, I think it's important to highlight, these are families, these are people who are going through some of the most traumatic experiences in their lives. And we really have to think about how we wrap them in support, how we really start to think more around the preventative work, and how we really provide resources and solutions for folks. Yes, numbers are down, but we're still dealing with a lot as a city. And as you mentioned at the beginning of this question, it keeps a lot of us busy all the time. So really thinking about how we wrap those communities and continue layered levels of support.
Director Brooks, since we have you here, I think I have to ask you the same question. What do you think is behind this decrease?
I think a lot of times people want to attribute success or blame to the police department, and that's just wrong. The fact is that what's driving down these numbers is the cooperation and partnership of the communities to reduce the violence, to address the issues of domestic violence, to address the issue of youth violence, to address the other contributing issues to our violence problem. It is not just simply a matter of locking up the bad guys. It really is us working in a more collaborative manner in order to make these changes. And that's the only way they're going to be made. When our city had our lowest rate in recent history, back into 2000, I believe, 4, 5, and 6, when we were, at that 500 or below, those are only achieved with us working in partnership with the community. And that's always going to be. It's those other things that really matter, that our schools are doing well, that our young people have opportunities, that people have opportunities to succeed in their personal and their own American dream. That's where we have success. That's what drives these numbers down.
Linda, what agencies or institutions do you think have a role in the city's public safety problem?
Well, of course, I think gender-based violence organizations, rape crisis centers, domestic violence organizations. I also think that there are a lot of youth groups, as well as even youth education, arts education groups that have a huge role, particularly in the summer and throughout the year. Oftentimes, young people are looking for mentors, for people to confide in. And when they establish these relationships, they are able to oftentimes find the help that they need when there are troubles at home or on the blocks and the streets that they live in. So for us, that's really pivotal. But I think the other partners are something that we've used a lot in the public health situation, as well as in gender-based violence, which is promotores de salud, community health workers. They are really the bridge to so many people, so many isolated families throughout our communities, especially during COVID. And I think that we should embrace this kind of model where we think about how do we train, our grandmas, our grandpas, our parents, young people who want to make a difference and can reach audiences that oftentimes traditional models of enforcement don't work and can't reach because that trust isn't there. So I would really love to see more investment in promotoras and community health workers throughout our communities.
So Garien, how do you, we just talked about sort of the murder rate and the shooting rate decreasing this year over last year. Again, you're only a couple of months, happy anniversary into your position. How do you plan on measuring success in this role?
I think we're going to measure success based off the number of people we're able to help. Genuinely, what's the impact we can make? How do we build our layered approach? What's our impact in communities? I think we want to be able to look back on this time that we've spent in office to really see how we've tried to change the trajectory of the city. So it just won't be based on numbers. We really want to see what's the impact that we're making, what are the investments we're making, and how lives are starting to change in and around the city. Linda brought up some good points. We're really thinking about being able to reach areas and basically understanding the audience, knowing that there are places that both Glenn and I will never be able to reach, and understanding who those experts are and having them play the lead role in really building a stronger community. So I think when we think about how we want to measure success, it's going to be what our impact has been on the people of Chicago, what has our impact been on young folks, how we invest in folks, and the reflection of that should show overall. Obviously, we know we won't eradicate violence overnight, but what we do know is we have an opportunity to change the trajectory of the city, and we can only do that through deep collaboration.
Director Brooks, you designed the city of Chicago's current turn-in program with the hopes of obviously making neighborhoods safer, the gun turn-in program, I should say. What goes into that kind of work, and have you seen it be effective?
It is absolutely effective, especially when we give people the opportunity to make their homes safer. Guns are one of those unique products that it doesn't matter whether you got it last week, last year, or 10 years ago, it's able to cause great harm to not only the individual, but their family, friends, and so forth. So absolutely, what really goes into that was that collaboration and partnership. What this really started out with is a bunch of our faith-based partners sitting down and saying, hey, instead of people coming to do a gun turn-in at the police station, why don't you use our locations where we have a different trust with people? That's what led to it. That's what led to the success, where instead of having gun turn-ins where we're getting 50, 75, we started getting gun turn-ins where we get thousands. So that is effective. And I know a lot of people want to say, well, we had a gun turn-in and crime should drop the next day. It doesn't really work with that. People don't schedule when they're going to get angry and have conflict. It happens in a moment. And when you have a gun available, it is a more deadly encounter. So whatever we can do to reduce those numbers of guns in our city to make our city safer is a success. And it's always hard to measure those things which we prevent.
Yeah, how do you know something worked if you can't, if it's not so tangible all the time? For the past several years, Chicago Police Department you've solved an average of 50% of the city's homicide rates per year. That number, known as the clearance rate, of course, is much lower for Black victims. We talk about trust and, people feeling much more comfortable returning a gun to a church facility than, coming to the police department. What kind of impact does, the department's clearance rate have on community trust, and how do you build trust?
Building trust is what we think about full time. You build trust through relationships, intentional, deliberate relationships that are respectful. We build trust by building partnerships. what the deputy mayor is trying to do over in the hall of creating those extended partnerships that empower people to make changes in the community, throughout the community, that builds trust. So it's not a singular thing that builds trust. I wish it was, but it is going to be time, deliberate effort, and really a lot of hard work. There's going to be moments that we're going to have to sit down and say, you know what, we could handle that better, or I'm sorry. There's going to be moments for the department. There's going to be moments for the community. I mean, and we all have to show grace and patience, and we continue to work at the goal and never lose sight of it. The goal here is for our communities to be safe. The goal is that our kids can go down to the street without being shot. The goal is that you can start your car without worrying about carjacking. The goal, you can be in a relationship that may or may not work, but you don't have to worry about someone else trying to hurt you because they're upset. That's the goal. So, we can talk about all the other big numbers, but we want people to be safe and live their lives and their dreams and pursue their happiness.
Linda, same question to you. How do you think the police department can build trust with the community?
I think it would be really helpful to have more districts that have assigned relationship builders, especially with those that are working with youth as well as in gender-based violence. I think that for us is really important. When something happens, we have someone we can call automatically that there is an issue, particularly when we think about the presence of guns in homes where domestic violence survivors are living. And that to us is something that is critical. Right now, we know that the victims of domestic violence homicides has increased in the last several years, and overwhelmingly many of them are Black women. So I think that building relationships with churches, building relationships with schools, making sure that there is someone at the police districts who can help us to make sure that a survivor does have someone they can connect to when they would like to, when a firearm has to be removed. Because without that, the number of homicides due to domestic violence are going to continue to increase. I'm still waiting for the latest figures, but I know that last year, in 2021, 86% of domestic violence related homicide victims were Black. And that's disproportionate of our Black population in the city. And so I think that is something that there should be some real discussions with members of the Black community, particularly women, as to how they can feel safer with the police departments.
And before, go ahead.
Can I jump in there?
Please.
So, and here's our challenge as a department. So currently we have 22 districts. In all 22 districts, I have a domestic violence liaison officer. I also have domestic violence advocates. One of our objectives and challenges every day is to continue to reach out and establish those new relationships. I think as an organization, there are moments that we work really well with a group of people, but we always need to expand that group. And that is always a challenge for us. We have a very large apparatus of individuals working on community policing. Our biggest goal in the next I would say the next step would be continue to reach out and make sure people understand we have people dedicated to just what Linda said. And she's 100% right, but people have to know who those people are.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to also remind folks who are joining us. I see some of you have chimed in on the chat just to say, hey, thank you for doing that. Hello to you all as well. We're glad you're here. I also want to remind you that you're welcome to also use that chat function to share questions with the panelists, and I will try and ask those aloud so that they can answer those questions. So please, you're welcome to chime in and tell us your thoughts and send us your questions as well. Garien, I want to ask you that same question about trust and the community and how that can be built.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the points have been hit, but I will say, obviously, we know trust doesn't happen overnight. Distrust didn't happen overnight, right? But I will tell you one thing that I think we have to do better in general is really communicate the work that folks are doing. Folks in community, the work that CPD is doing, the work that other agencies and government are doing. So it's not just an issue of trust with CPD. People look at trust with the government. People look at trust with the healthcare system, education systems. So how do we genuinely, effectively be more transparent and really open the doors. You've heard the mayor say it often, the fifth floor is open. And, you know, we genuinely mean that. How do we bring more people in these conversations so they can help us implement the changes that they want to see and be a part of that process? I think that helps go a long way. And I also just really think, you know, the more we effectively communicate the work that we are doing in and around city government, in and around the city in general, really helps to build that trust. And also, honestly, thinking about how we respond to things that we see, right? How do we respond to not just violence, right? How else do we respond to other needs in community, right? You have lights out on your block. How can we help with that? You got things that you need fixed in your parks. How can we help with that? There's things that you need from streets and sands. How can we really wrap our arms around and really think about a layered approach to government? So we'll all be working to build that collective trust together. Again, it doesn't happen overnight. And it's going to take deep collaboration on both sides to really work together to show here's the direction we want to go in. And we have to take those steps together.
Here's a question from someone in the chat. Hi, Lori. Thank you for the question. Pointing out that there was just a mass shooting again in North Lawndale, 1 dead, 8 injured. And basically the question is what can be done, what is being done in that community, North Lawndale in particular, to address this particular shooting in real time.
Yeah, you want to start up?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, you know, I think it's really important to understand as soon as that tragedy happens, we all go into action. So I think there's a perception because we might not see that reaction on a news channel that the city didn't go in reaction. So starting that night, everybody was woken up. I was woken up at 1 o'clock. Matter of fact, I was out of town. We started coming back for that one. We were all in meetings by, I believe the first meeting started around 9 that morning with just senior leaders to put things together. One of the things that we really wanted to put together is a victim assistance center, which is opening up in 30 minutes in that community. I have outreach workers, or we have outreach workers going up and down the blocks in that community, letting people know that there is help available. And that's from 1 to 7 today over at the Deliverance Temple at 1457 Kaminsky. That will be open today for those people in that community that were affected by this violence and this trauma. It's not just the people who were shot, the people who are down the street who hear those bullets and who are terrified, the people that come out to the streets and find their cars have been damaged. We understand it. It's those people's families who are scared to death for their loved ones because they've just been hurt terribly. So that'll be open today, where we are, not only does the police department come out there, but you're going to have people from UCAN as a local community-based organization, which has victim services. We're bringing therapy dogs out there. I have victim crime advocates who will be out there. This is the same thing that we did in Highland Park. Matter of fact, Highland Park, we sent some of our people to help them, and we're doing the same for our communities. This is important that we begin not only the healing process, but it also gives people the opportunity to talk to the detectives if they so need to do that, whether it's about this particular incident or something else that is in the community. So we're putting an on-the-ground presence there immediately to start helping those families, to start helping that block, and more importantly, that community.
Garien, did you want to add anything to that?
I think Director Brooks knocked it out of the park. And I think, again, that's an example of that collaboration between government and community. You heard one of the very first things he mentioned was not only will CPD be out there, not only will victim services be out there, but also community-based organizations. We're dealing with trauma at different levels than other cities have ever seen. And we are really responding to this stuff in real time, right? These are tragic events, and we genuinely need to wrap our arms around the community. So Director Brooks did a great job.
Linda, what do you think? Because, you know, we often hear about, you know, young people maybe getting pulled into gangs from a very young age, right? What can be done to sort of steer them away, catch them before they get caught up in that life?
So in our community, I think one of the things that happens is the immigrant experience, or not having your parents present because they're holding 3 jobs, which is often takes place in Black and communities of color, where parents have multiple responsibilities. They're not as present as they wish to be. And I think that one of the things that we need to address is making sure that children and youth don't feel isolated, that someone cares. Someone cares about their daily life. Someone cares about what they want for their future. Somebody cares about their communities. And I think that what often is lacking is not so much that community members don't care. I think community members care about their young people. I think community members care about their children. But I don't know if we care outside of our communities as much, especially when it comes to building resources for them. I think that we need to get out of our communities and visit other communities and get to know them and really develop more of an understanding of how we should be working together on so many issues that we face together as a city. I think that's something that to us is really important. I've been really glad that at Mujeres, we actually did a tour of North Lawndale a week and a half ago with Chicago Mahogany Tours, or the rest of the staff and some of our promotores are going this week. To me, it is not appropriate. It is not right that so many of our residents live in South Lawndale, and we don't know how so many of our city members live in North Lawndale or in Englewood or in Bronzeville or in Humboldt Park or in Austin. We need to really become more welcoming to challenging ourselves, to learn about how other Chicagoans live and taking responsibility for that. And, we're just taking the first step by learning about communities and understanding their rich history and who their families are, but there needs to be more. And this is just a journey for us, but I think more need to be very much intentional about having those conversations.
So
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Garien. Were you saying something?
No, you go ahead, Glenn. I'm gonna go after you.
So Linda brings up a huge point. It is really important for people to get outside the community, what their spirits, and experience this whole beautiful city, and do it in a way that, one, we've created opportunities for you to see other parts of the city that are respectful and useful to what the community feels it needs. And we have this same challenge with our officers as they come into new communities, making sure they learn about that community and the beautiful history, the rich tapestry of its culture, and how do you understand that as you go ahead in your daily actions. So those are something that we really have to do. And it's really easy to get really just kind of focus in your neighborhood and not get outside of it and experience. And I don't just mean the touristy neighborhoods. I mean the community of the Chicago. When you say from your Chicago, and you can name a high school, or you can name a particular corner, you know the difference between a McDonald's and a Mr. Beef. You know the difference between all those little intricacies that make us a beautiful city. That's important, and you got to really get out there and learn where it is. You got to get down to limbs every now and then.
Yeah, and I'll just point back, Brandis, to your original question on youth, right? Really, I think we all have to do a better job of listening to young folks and really thinking about what the pathways that young folks have, how we open up more pathways to success, how we create better examples, but genuinely, how do we make sure young folks are at the tables helping guide these conversations? Just last week we had, and Glenn was there too, we had one of our budget town halls that was led by young folks. It's 350 young folks in that room really talking about community safety, education, healthcare, mental health, so many different areas, and leadership was on display. So when we think about ways to curtail violence and ways to stop interactions with young folks and gangs, listening to young folks about what they say they need and really making sure the work that we do reflects that would be very helpful as well.
All right, so we've got two more questions in the chat. I'm gonna toggle back over to one. This one goes to Director Brooks. How do you see the limitations of the police department in terms of addressing issues like mental health crises, housing insecurity, other factors that contribute to community safety and well-being? And what are your challenges in terms of building authentic relationships with the organizations and entities that are equipped to provide relief and support in these areas?
So I really don't see them so much as limitations, but opportunities to have those partnerships. We have right now, we have our CARES program, which is operating in 2 districts expanding to 3, where it's a collaboration of not only the police and fire department, but mental service providers that go out and help answer these needs for service. Here is one of the biggest things I see as a challenge. And it's not a complicated, but it's a real thing. Hours of operations. The police department operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And what we have a challenge is that most community-based organizations, through no fault of their own, have generally 9 to 5 hours, or they might extend to 7 or 8 o'clock, right? When we get that call at 10 o'clock, or we get that call at 1 a.m., those people are going to need the service, and the only people kind of left to work on that is your police and fire. You got some hospital-based, but they're within the hospital. So I think that is one of our biggest challenges of getting that those services ramped up to a 24-hour cycle. I think we can continue to build on a relationship, but how do we ramp it up to a 24-hour cycle where people are willing to respond at all hours and in all conditions? That's hard. Would be my answer.
Yes, as your job is. So we've got another question, this one from the Q&A from Nick Creighton. Nick, I think I know you. Works for Defy Ventures. It introduces entrepreneurship to people in custody. I've covered this as a journalist myself. Question is that as a returning resident who's out here engaging the youth, helping others, people acclimate home and talking to employers to have a fair chance for employment, how do we ensure that more engagement happens between us and the mayor's office and law enforcement so that we're not seen as a threat to the same society that we are here to heal? Garien, I'm going to send that one to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you right now, you won't find anybody in the mayor's office that views the returning citizens community as a threat. In fact, prior to joining the administration, when I was the director of the Illinois Justice Project, we helped create the Office of Reentry for the city of Chicago. And we created the Illinois Reentry Council. I've done a lot of work with the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative housed in the Lieutenant Governor's office. So that is not the way we approach this work in this administration at all. In fact, I think it's very important that we continue to open doors for returning citizens, from either young folks who are leaving the Department of Juvenile Justice, young folks who are even the young folks who are leaving JTDC, the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. We really have to continue opening doors, having comprehensive plans and supports for reentry, meaning how do we remove barriers? What's the work that we can do to remove barriers? And then historically, how do we continue to build on that? How do we remove barriers to access to housing? How do we change language? One key example is we really worked hard to change language that is used on the Illinois Department of Corrections website, where you used to see words like offender, and you don't see those words on their website anymore, because we work in concert and in partnership with them to change that language, because language matters. So you won't find anyone in this administration that views returning citizens as a threat, right? This is yet another opportunity to work with people who are experts, who can genuinely change the way we view reentry in the city of Chicago and continue to make our work in reentry in Chicago and Illinois an example for the rest of the country.
Absolutely. I think here is one of those paradigm shifts that's been significant in law enforcement. Returning citizens are not a threat. I will say we are third in line hearing from them, besides themselves as being number one, number two being their family, and then we're right there cheering for their success. And not only just cheering, but working with organizations to help ensure that. Because here's the bottom line, we want them to be safe too. And if we don't create an environment, if we don't create relationships and partnerships that move them into that kind of life that they want, that productive life that gets in their car, their home, they let them provide for their children, then we all lose. Mm-hmm. So we are all on board with that. And I can tell you last night, we had a couple of situations, and it was people who have had those experiences that were the most helpful to making a difference out in that situation. So we understand it, and we're supportive of it, and we're finding new and better ways. And it's This is a relationship that's growing and is probably growing. One of the fastest relationships in the department that's growing.
Yeah, I'm gonna add one more piece onto this one. Similar to what I said earlier, Nick, around having young folks really lead a lot of the work because of their expertise. We don't build a better paradigm for reentry without people who've actually experienced reentry to genuinely show us how to do this right. This is why we lean on expertise of people who have been impacted by systems like DLC, like JTDC, like DJJ. That work has been important. And one more example, when we started some work on the 21st century transformation plan for the Department of Juvenile Justice, we had young folks who were currently in DJJ help lead that work for us. So again, like Glenn mentioned, that relationship is growing and blossoming, and we welcome it more and more every day. People, no matter where you are, no matter what experiences you've had in the city of Chicago, we all want a safer city. So we need to do it together in collaboration. So you can come and work with us, man. The 5th floor is open. We mean that. Come on over.
We're almost out of time. Linda, we'll go ahead. I want to get you in, and then a final question.
I was just going to say that I think the other thing is we definitely want to include them in the process, returning citizens, but we also need to ask, what do they need in terms of their own mental health? Many of them are gender-based violence survivors, either as children or adult or while in the prison system. And so I think that's something that we don't highlight enough in terms of, their success in terms of coming back to our communities. And so that's something that definitely needs to be lifted.
Clearly a good question, Nick. Thank you for that. So we are almost out of time, everyone, but I do want to get out on one sort of final thought question that I'll ask all of you. Some of you might be a little bit limited in what you can say because we know that Mayor Johnson's currently in the process of choosing one of 3 finalists for Chicago's next superintendent through a process that we've never seen before, or he could choose someone else, depending on the options that he has been given before asking, of course, Chicago City Council to confirm his choice. And Linda, I want to start with you, but what do you think the city needs in its next police superintendent?
Someone who's truly committed to survivors of gender-based violence, someone who will prioritize us. I'm glad that, Director Brooks reminded us that there are domestic violence liaisons in each one of the district departments, but I think that we need to make sure that we think about how there are other avenues as well, and having a police department that is responsive to the fact that sometimes the police can make things more difficult for survivors in certain situations, but sometimes police are needed in certain situations. So being open to the fact that, non-police responses are needed when survivors are being threatened, whether it's, a paramedic or a mental health professional or a caseworker to come in, I think that is pivotal. I think also making sure that there's a true commitment at the police department for sexual harassment training, understanding domestic violence, understanding how domestic violence and sexual violence may manifest differently in different communities, understanding the signs of domestic violence and sexual assault, knowing who those organizations are, those trusted partners, so that when a survivor comes forward, the police official is well informed of who they can make that referral to. I think that's very, very, very important. Director Brooks? You're probably limited in what you can say here. What do you think the city needs in the next?
Thank you for recognizing my limitations.
Your opportunities, Glenn, your opportunities.
Listen, this is what the department is really looking for. We're looking for committed leadership as we go through this transformational process, and realizing that we have to do it with our community and our community partner. This is not something that we're going to just do internally. I think we have some challenges are facing us, but I think we are more ready to meet those challenges than people realize. There are tens of thousands, or actually 12,000 committed individuals here at the department who get up every day, work through the day and night to try to make a difference for our neighbors, for our city. And that leader has to realize that we are all into this together and we are willing to make that difference.
Garien, I can rephrase the question if it helps. How are you advising the mayor on who to choose for that job?
First, I think we have to tip our hat to the work that CCPSA has done, the Community Commission, on bringing really strong candidates and really having a deep level of engagement with community in and around this process. So first, tipping our hats to that. The mayor is going to take his time and make the right decision. We know we need a collaborator. We know we need someone to genuinely continue to move work forward. And I'm sure the mayor will end up making the right decision, and we'll have that leader for the department, because that is one of the biggest jobs in the country. So just really thinking about how we continue to move the work forward, how we continue that collaboration, and how we continue to build on the partnership and that layered approach of government that we're taking, and having them as a good partner. These are the things that the mayor's thinking about. These are the things that the entire administration is thinking about, and we're ready to partner and get the ball rolling.
If you want to break any news here, Garien, you're welcome to tell me when we might hear who the mayor has chosen.
The only news I can break is that it is 12:47. It's almost 12:48, so we're good to go.
That's not breaking. Okay. That is where we'll have to leave it, though. I want to thank my panelists for joining us for this discussion. I think it's been obviously very insightful and useful as I find my way back to our notes here. So thank you for joining today's community conversation. Deputy Mayor Garien Gatewood, Director Glen Brooks of CPD, and Linda Tortolero. And thanks to all of you for joining today's community conversation. We're going to share a short form in the chat, and if you click that, then you can submit ideas, stories, topics, issues that you think we should also be covering. So please take a minute to fill that out, share your thoughts. Before we part ways, I also want to mention that for dedicated coverage of WTTW News and Chicago Tonight special, A Safer City, you can watch that on Chicago Tonight Mondays at 5:30 and at 10. You'll also find ongoing and extensive data and investigative reporting on the WTTW News website, WTTW.com/news, in case you didn't know. And finally, you can watch Chicago Tonight Latino Voices on Fridays at 5:30 and Chicago Tonight Black Voices on Fridays at 10 p.m.